Happy Monday, everybody. It is Monday, and you know what time it is. It's time for another edition of Ask Mike. Mike Irwin answering all of your questions. And Mike, we've got some good ones this week.
We've got actual basketball games to talk about. We've got a falls camp scrimmage to talk about. So we got football, basketball, a lot of stuff about that.
A lot of good stuff, and it is only August too. But let's jump right into it since we have a packed show. Our first question is from Revolution, who asks, after seeing the basketball team play in Europe, what are your thoughts on expectations for this coming season? And who do you think is likely to be the MVP of this team? How does that player's potential compare with other Hog greats, Corliss, Moncrief, Robertson?
A lot of good with a little bit of questionable stuff mixed in. Tell a quick story about a friend of mine in high school that always wanted to buy a Corvette. His dad was a farmer, and he saved his money working on his dad's farm in the summers to the point where he had enough down payment to get a bank loan, going to get him a Corvette. So he likes the one that's on the showroom floor. He goes in, he arranges to buy it. They're doing the paperwork. He's with me in the showroom, and he's walking around this car, and he's just inspecting every part of it. It's perfect. But the minute he drove it off that floor, he started noticing things about it. After a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, it was no longer perfect anymore because it was being used. Yeah. That's this basketball team. From the moment Musselman put it together with the great recruiting class and then all the portal guys, everybody's talking about, wow, you can win a national championship with this bunch. This is the best team that Arkansas has ever had on paper. And they talked about it on paper for months. Well, now it's not on paper anymore. It's a real team. And so they made some mistakes. And I think a lot of fans are going to look at some of this stuff and go, whoa, what was that? That's not what I thought that these guys were going to be. So I would just say there was a whole lot of good with some stuff mixed in there that wasn't good. Some of it was the European style of play, which is weird physical. It's not unusual for a point guard to, the guys on him, just shove him backwards and go make a play. Or if you're on one of Arkansas's point guards and he starts to move, just shove him and stop his progress. Jordan Walsh, who's a big dude, at one point was trying to drive the lane, and a guy came in and just gave him a forearm shiver in the ribs, and you could tell it hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there was a foul called, but it wasn't a shooting foul. So they do a lot of things in Europe that are different from what these guys did, and I think it disrupted them a little bit. The best thing they do is when they're in transition with their passing game. There's going to be a lot of assists this year. A lot of guys know how to pass the ball, and there were some amazing things. Didn't even have to be full court. It could be in the half court. You might get Anthony Black driving around from the left side, goes around top of the key, and all of a sudden he's looping it over his head, and here's Brazil slamming it in, and you're going, what was that? Wow. So there was a lot of that. But a lot of what they do is also high risk, so they had a lot of turnovers. And these European teams, and your dad's a coach, he knows, he's been over there, he knows what they do. These European teams aren't as talented, but they're much more disciplined than you think they are. They play really good defense, so Arkansas was forced into a lot of turnovers when they got careless. And they burned Arkansas's man half-court defense several times, just blow around somebody because they're quicker than you think they are. So the point is, they look, in Game 4, for instance, what a back-and-forth game. Arkansas is up like 20-6 or whatever at the end of the first quarter, and you think they're going to blow these guys out, and then all of a sudden it's close. Then they start blowing them out again, and then it's close again. I just think that Arkansas, for one thing, Musselman's substituting a lot. So he doesn't have the continuity. Those guys just had 7 guys that they played. So they're going to be at a certain level all the time. Arkansas is using a lot of guys, and you just end up with some inconsistencies. What does this all mean? It means that he can go back now, and he's got about 2 months to show him, a little less than 2 months, to show him this film, go over, and we know he does this sort of stuff, go over what they did wrong, what they need to work on. And so I think there's going to be a real value to this European tour that will show up early in the season in November and December, but we'll see. I still have a lot of questions about this team. For one thing, they don't shoot the ball, at least in this tournament, nearly as well as from the outside as I thought they would. Yeah. Who's the three-point shooter? Even Nick Smith Jr. didn't shoot the three very well. No, so what was that? I don't know what it was. It could have been the weird basketball they were using, the weird rims that seemed to get bent one way one time and are bent up the next time. So there's a lot of things that you could talk about. But overall, I would say it was a success. They look like they're going to be pretty good.
They do. And the MVP for you, Mike?
Nick Smith Jr., he can do it all. He can play every facet of the game. He can shoot the three. He didn't do it as much as but he shot it some.
Yeah.
He can shoot twos. He can shoot the little fall away jumper 6 foot away from the basket. He can create his own shot. He can create a shot for somebody else. He can be on the receiving end of an alley-oop. He can be on the passing end of an alley-oop. He can rebound. He can play defense. He does it all. He's the best player on the team. Tevin Brazil is going to be their big dominant inside guy because he's so athletic and can just make so many things happen. He will play the majority of the minutes as a big,
yes,
even though they got 4 bigs. So those two really stood out to me.
And I think they could have potential to go down as being some of the best players in Arkansas basketball history. Go up there with the greats, right?
Yeah, I mean, Nick Smith Jr. especially. I don't know about Black. He looks pretty good. Jordan Walsh, at least in these 4 games, was a disappointment. He didn't look like a McDonald's All-American. Mm-hmm. He was frustrated. He didn't drive and power to the basket the way he normally does, and I think some of that was they'll just knock you on your rear end, and it will be a foul here. It's not a foul there, so.
Well, we'll definitely see. We've got some more basketball questions, though. Webb Scott says, known for his very detailed scouting reports, did he say that one of his players gave him a scouting report on one of the European teams that they played? If so, that's amazing.
Well, what he does, and he does this all year long, but he obviously did it in Europe, these players have their own laptops. Now, they had a lot of fun during the day. They went to the beach, they played football in the water, they went on tours, but at night, they're in their rooms. He wants them to get their laptops out, and he's sending them video of the next opponent. Study this team. And that's what they're supposed to do. But Barry Dunning Jr. did that and then sent back his own version of a scouting report, and Muss said it was really good. So maybe someday he plans on being a coach, but he said that's the first time anyone's ever taken the video that he sends to them and turns around and submits a scouting report on the other team. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I actually posted that tweet and put it out there, and it got quite a lot of interaction on social media. But the biggest thing, I was going through and seeing the replies, and apparently this is not new for Barry Dunning Jr. His high school coaches and his high school was replying and saying, yeah, he's done that. Like, that's just who he is as a player. So
he's
amazing.
A guy that will get playing time. There's some guys that may not get after watching this thing, but he's one of the guys that'll be in maybe an 8-man rotation, 9-man rotation. He was a pleasant surprise in this tournament.
Definitely, I think so as well. Team Otis says, bonjour, Mike. I love that. The basketball team is in Spain. Do you wish you were there with them? If not Spain, what country would you want to go to cover the Hogs?
Well, nobody asked me if I wanted to go, or you, or anybody else.
I had my passport ready.
We didn't go. Would I have liked to have gone? Sure,
yeah.
That'd be great. So where would I go if we went back and I could say to Muss, hey, I would rather you go here because I want to go on the trip and I want to go to this place.
Okay.
And Scotland's not known for its golf, or for its basketball. It's known for its golf. But I would like to go to Scotland because that's where my ancestors are from, and they're Highlanders, and I would like to go there. There is an actual professional team in Scotland. Yeah, they're called the Glasgow Rocks.
I love it.
And so if I could talk him into going and playing the Glasgow Rocks, I could go cover that game and then go over to St. Andrews and play the old course and play some golf. That would be fun. That would be the ideal trip.
Which player do you think would have the best golf game on that team?
I don't know. Some of them surely play golf.
Some of them surely play golf.
But I haven't heard.
We'll have to see. We'll have to ask the team that, because I actually want to know that as well. Eddie Lynn asks, what was the biggest thing that came out of Saturday's first fall scrimmage on the Hill?
Well, it was the passing game. And if you'll remember the first day in pads, Sam Pittman said, man, the offense didn't show up. The defense wanted it more. They won the day. So this is 2 days later, and they must have taken it personally because it turned completely around. And it was an offensive day. First of all, we didn't see it. So we're going by what Coach Pittman said, right?
Yes.
But he doesn't blow smoke. He tells the truth. If it was bad, he would say it was bad. And he said K.J. Jefferson was amazing, had a huge day throwing the ball. And a lot of it was the offensive line, he said, which pass blocked very well. So that's good news to hear. But also, a bunch of receivers stepped up. I'm going to start with Matt Landers. He's the player that started out at Georgia, then went to Toledo and ends up here. He's 6'5". He's got big hands, good hands, and he can run. He's fast. And he had been looking good in camp anyway. Well, he had a 60-yard catch and a 50-yard touchdown catch, so that's impressive. and then Warren Thompson. Now, Warren Thompson's the guy that I mentioned early on as somebody that has to step up because he's the one returning older veteran that they had that played a lot last year.
Right.
And he had done nothing. He didn't do anything last spring. Sam Pittman said he had a very disappointing spring. He's a guy they need. And Warren Thompson stepped up, had a big scrimmage, he caught a 40-yard touchdown pass, and Sam Pittman ended up saying, if he plays like this fall, our passing game will be fine because they need him. So that was impressive. Then what about Hazelwood, the guys everybody talking about, the OU guy? Sam Pittman ended up saying, and he didn't say this last spring, he says it now. He said he didn't play in the spring the way he's playing now. And he'd been performing in these practices even before this one. Now, he wasn't spectacular. He had, I think, one 25-yard catch and some others. Didn't have a touchdown catch. But he's been very consistent. So right there you've got three guys that are probably going to be the guys that are out there on the field most of the time. But you've also got these three freshmen that stepped up, and Sam Pittman said all three will play. And that would be Isaiah Satinia, Sam Bakke, and Quincy McAdoo. They all look good. So what are you talking about here? 6 wideouts that are all looking good. And Sam Pittman ended up saying what I thought going into camp was going to be a weakness on this team now looks like it's going to be a strength. So that was my big takeaway from fall camp so far in the scrimmage.
Yeah, especially. And I love you mentioned Hazelwood stepping up from spring to now. You know, I like the fact that he's been a leader for the room as well. He's not only just stepping up on the field, he's being a leader for all those guys and even the young ones that you mentioned. So that's got to be good news as well for Sam and that crew. Lanny says all this hype about Malik Hornsby being a huge weapon at receiver this year, and it sounds like he's the backup QB and that's it. What happened to the hottest story of the spring?
Well, it's what we just talked about. When you have all these receivers, and I do think it's amazing because in the media, that's all the media did, and I'm part of it. But I kind of poo-pooed this, if you'll remember.
I do remember. I remember sitting on this desk with you. And
I was skeptical about all this, but there were stories all summer long about, boy, this is going to be big, this is going to be. What was interesting, and there was not one question, did Malik catch a pass in the scrimmage? What did Malik do? And nobody asked. And I assume he didn't do anything because nothing was said about it. Now, does this mean they won't use him at all? No, I think they're still going to line him up in the slot some. I think Kendall Briles likes that kind of stuff. I think it will give a defense something to think about. Ooh, what's he going to do here? And I wouldn't be surprised with his speed if he doesn't come in and break a 1 or 2 this year. I just think he's going to be used very sparingly. What they're mostly using him this year is as the backup quarterback, which you need a backup quarterback. If you don't have one and you're one injury away from the season going south, and that's where they were last year and they just got lucky. He's much better. Malik Hornsby's much better as a passer than he was last year. He's got touch on his short passes. He's throwing the deep ball really well. So Razorback fans can breathe a little easier knowing that you got a guy back there as the backup quarterback who's a lot better than he was last year. And then they've got a couple of other guys, Cade Fortin is pretty good as a quarterback. He throws the ball pretty well. So they got a couple of options there if something were to happen to Jefferson.
Yeah, I did see his name on the unofficial stat sheet we got. So he did do something. I just can't remember what it was. So again, we might have to look at that. Yeah, if you Will's looking at it wasn't a good Will says it wasn't a good stat. So we're not going to bring it up then. He didn't do anything. Jeff Spicoli wants to know, who would you guess starts in the secondary?
I think it's kind of a battle between 5 guys. I'm going to name them off. Malik Chavis, I think he's a likely starter. Pittman calls him Chavis, but I think it's Chavis.
I think it's Chavis too.
He's 6'3". All these guys are like 6'2", 6'3" range, tall guys, and you like that in your cornerbacks. You do like it. I can remember a time when they had a lot of short guys back there, and they were getting beat badly. So I'll start with Chavis. Then you go to Hudson Clark. He's been a starter off and on for the last 2 previous seasons. He's kind of an up and down guy. He comes up with these spectacular interceptions and then he gets beat and all of a sudden he's on the bench, but then he's back out there again. And that's sort of what we've seen from him this spring. So I think he's certainly in the mix to be a starter. Dwight McLaughlin, I think they call him Nudie. And
Nudie.
I'm going to assume that's Noodie.
I think it's Nudie.
And I don't want to go with that one. I'll just call it Nudie.
I'm not sure.
He's the LSU transfer, played 6 games for them in the secondary, so I think he's a possibility. And then Ladarius Bishop is Day.
Yeah.
And he's in the mix. He's a tall veteran. He started 9 games last year. So I think from those guys, you're going to get 2 starters, but you also got 3 backup guys. So they got plenty of depth back there. And I like that.
Yeah, it's going to
You need it. You need it at that position.
Yeah, and that's one of the rooms that has been highlighted a lot in fall camp as well. So it's
Right.
a pretty big competition there as well. Mousetown says, I heard you say on Phil Elson's radio show that Coach Pittman restricts how much access you media guys have to the assistant coaches. Is there a reason for this? Did he get burned by an assistant in a media interview?
No, he's not doing it because of that, and he's not mad at anybody. Basically, that comes from the guy that he played under at Georgia, you know, his head coach at Georgia, Kirby Smart.
That one guy.
And then Kirby Smart got it from Nick Saban when he was an assistant under Nick Saban. Nick Saban is a control freak. That's why he doesn't want it done. If I could do one thing with Sam Pittman, if I could sit down with him for 15 minutes, and it hasn't happened, if I could do one thing, I would say, get rid of this policy. Just because Nick Saban didn't do it, just because Kirby Smart didn't do it, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Frank Broyles loved this kind of stuff, and here's why. Assistant coaches can tell you stories in press conferences that you're not going to get from the head coach. Why? Because they're closer to these players. They're with them all the time, and they know things about the players. Michael Shearer, the linebackers coach, told a great story in there that became a good story that I put on the air, and I didn't know anything about this. So, yeah, you know, Sam, get rid of this. You know, this is the one thing you need to change. We get these assistant coaches one time a year, and they're just loaded with good stories. And you know what good stories do? They put butts in the seats. They get people excited. And these coaches can tell these stories because they're closer to the players.
Yeah, you as a head coach can't see everything that goes on in every single practice, but these guys can. And it's just,
within their position group, they see it much closer.
Yes, and it's been awesome to talk to these assistant coaches as well, because we've gotten a better idea at who the players are and what they've been able to add to fall camp. I mean, I've enjoyed listening to every single coach. They've done a really good job.
Yes, they have.
Arky Redneck says, I really like seeing, he's literally echoing what I just said, really like seeing all these assistant coaches and their comments after practice. Good stuff coming from Pittman's staff. What's the best bit of info you've gotten from them so far, and who said it?
Okay, I'll go back to Michael Shearer, who I mentioned.
I knew you were going to bring that one up.
And it was a great story. And it was something that went right over our heads last year. If you'll remember, you weren't here, but I remember it very clearly. Bumper Poole had been a starter the previous year and had played as a freshman and a sophomore, and he's been a starter. And all of a sudden, Hayden Henry comes out of nowhere, and he's the starter at that linebacker position, and Bumper Poole is the backup. But we didn't think much about it because Poole got about as many snaps as Hayden Henry did, and they both played well, so we just thought, hey, he's using them both, it's okay. So we didn't think anything about it. Well, in the middle of an answer about Bumper Poole this year, Michael Shearer goes into this thing. He said, I think Bumper Poole spent pretty much all of last year not liking me. He was pretty much mad at me all last year. And we're like, what? And he talks about how he didn't make him the starter. He said, I'm glad he was mad about it because it made him a better player. And then he went on to something else. Well, wait a minute. We're like, whoa, wait, go back to that. So when the next questioner came up, it's like, let's go back to that other thing. Tell us more about this. So he goes into why it happened and how it happened, and he's explaining it, and he's saying, the thing about Hayden Henry is that he's like a sprinter hot out of the box. He just comes flying out of that box. Right at the start of the game, first defensive possession, boom, he's going to go out and make a big play. He said, now I'm over there with Bumper Poole, and I'm watching his reaction. And everybody's going nuts. Look at Hayden Henry. Look what he's doing. And Bumper Poole's over there going, I want out on the field. When are they going to put me on the field? And he said, I waited and I waited until he was like a caged animal. And I waited till I knew he was about to explode, and then boom, I put him on the field, and then he takes off and is playing well. And he said, I did that all year long. So it worked, and it made him a better player, and it was better for our team. But he said, He didn't say anything about it. He didn't complain, but I know he was mad at me. He said, I'm absolutely certain because I know exactly what I put him through. If I had been a player, I'd have been mad at me. So now Bob Holt goes, well, if he didn't say anything, if he didn't complain, how do you know he was mad at you? And he said, because I can read body language. And he said he was mad. But I'm thinking to myself, well, whoa, if he was mad, why did he come back for his 5th year? Because he didn't have to. So he must not be too mad. So I kind of tucked that away in my head. Well, then a couple of days later, Bumper Poole comes in for an interview. And Kyle Parkinson, who's a sports information director, comes out in front of us before it ever happens and says, guys, don't ask him about that stuff that Shearer said about him being mad at him. He doesn't want to talk about that. So everybody respected it and didn't say anything. But then when he started to leave, somebody asked him as he was walking away, and he said, no comment, no comment. He wasn't smiling when he said it. So I can only conclude that Bumper Poole was mad at him and may still be mad at him. Now, why is that interesting? Oh, anybody that's ever played football has known of a situation like that. I had a junior high coach. We thought this guy hated us. He was mean. He was running guys off at the first 2 or 3 days of practice, and he looked at me. I was a little midget guy, and he looked at me and he said, Erwin, if you're still alive when this practice is over, I'll let you stay on the team. Now, I didn't really think he was going to kill me. Today, your coach would probably get fired for saying that, but I had enough common sense to know what he really meant was, I'm fixing to put you through the ringer. Now, we had this big 15-year-old kid. We're all 12, and this guy's 15. He's a running back. He lines everybody up on either side, puts me in the middle, and has me tackle this guy. And he just runs over me about 10 times. Now, he never got through to the other end. I did make the tackle, but he was knocking me backwards. And when it was over, I looked around, and then when the practice was over, I looked around, and he never said, you're off the team. And he'd already told 2 or 3 guys, you got to go. You're not what we want. So I go back to class, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I'm on the team. I made it. And yeah, he's mean, and I don't like him, but I made it. And this is what football is all about. And Shearer just told that story. Yeah. And you would never get that if you don't have an assistant coach to tell that story. That's why I think these coaches need to be more active with the media.
I agree, too, because it'd be nice to get those stories throughout the season as well, not just for one time at fall camp. H. McCamish, did I get it right this time?
Yep.
Yes, awesome. I keep reading that there are battles at several positions for who makes the Razorbacks starting lineup. Where are the biggest battles going on right now?
Well, we've already talked about it.
Yeah.
It's in at cornerback.
Yeah.
That's where the battles are because there's 5 guys competing for 2 spots, and they've got 2 more, Kewan Parker and Kari Johnson. Parker redshirted last year, but he was rated the number 2 quarterback coming out of Oklahoma, or number 2 cornerback in Oklahoma, number 2 player in Oklahoma last year.
Wow.
And then Johnson played 14 games over the first 2 years, so those 2 guys have played a lot too. So you're really talking about 7 guys in there, and there's some real competition there. And Sam Pittman said that's where the most competition is, at cornerback.
You love it. You love to hear it. Top Hog 19 asks, why the worry over Texas in the SEC by some fans? Over the last 6 meetings, we are 4-2. Since 1990, we are 6-4. We have won the last 2 by scores of 31-7 and 40-21. We have come a long way from the SWC days where we had to fear Texas. I think Sam has hit on the pattern to knock off Bama soon. Ooh.
Yeah, I agree with that. If I'm an Arkansas fan with these changes coming to the SEC, I'm more worried about Oklahoma than Texas, a lot more worried. Oklahoma's good, and they have good coaching. Texas is like the ultimate overrated, it's like 5-star U for guys coming out of Texas high schools who don't turn into anything. Because they, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, because I'm not there, but they have more guys that get to school and act entitled and don't do in college what they were supposed to do coming out of high school. It happens over and over and over again. And they've had some good coaches. I mean, they've hired some good coaches over the years, guys that have been successful at other places, and they get to Texas and they bomb. Why? I just think that whole place is arrogant. I think they're always, where are they right? And I guarantee you, go look in preseason polls, they've all got them up there again. The media does this. It's the Nick Saban rat poison theory. That when you hear all this stuff about how good you are and how good your team is, and you start believing it's rat poison. And I will say this, if I was a five-star player in Texas, I would not go to the University of Texas. If I was an up-and-coming head coach, a young coach, maybe at a good mid-major and Texas wanted to hire me, I'd say, nope, I'll wait for another opportunity. So I'm not worried about Texas, more worried about Oklahoma. They've got guys that can coach and players that aren't entitled.
Oh, I like it. That's a good statement. S. Giles wants to know, did Cal blow up Kentucky football? I love this question. Did he blow up Kentucky football with his public comment about Kentucky being a basketball school, not a football school? Seems like the other SEC coaches are going to use that in recruiting against Mark Stoops and his staff. Should he be fired for his comment?
I don't think it's going to hurt Kentucky football because I think a lot of players understand what was going on there. Now, I will just back up and say what Calipari said was true, but it's something you shouldn't say if you're him. It is a basketball school. It'll always be a basketball school. And all that means is that doesn't mean that football is not important there. It's just basketball. It's one of those rare schools where basketball is bigger than football. And it's one thing to know that as the coach. It's another thing to stupidly say it. Because how disrespectful is that to your football program, which is very good. And so obviously Mark Stoops got angry. He lashed back, and it looks really bad. It'll blow over. But if I'm the AD at Kentucky, here's what I do. I wait till the season's over. I don't care what they do in basketball, good season, average season, whatever. When it's over, I go to Cal and I go, hey, you're on the downhill slide of what you've done here. You started off really hot. You've kind of gone downhill. You're not what we need right now. You need us more than we need you. We're Kentucky. We can always get a good and up-and-coming young coach, and we're always going to attract the best players in the country. So bye-bye. I'm not going to fire you, but go get another job or I will fire you. That's what I would do to him because he needs to go. They are a better program than he is as a head coach. I don't care how well he recruits. He doesn't coach. And his players, you got to be able to manage all those five-star attitudes. Musselman has managed five-star attitudes. He's not doing it. So, yeah, I'd say, I wouldn't fire him, but I'd say, come on. Go.
Move along.
Move along.
You're done.
We've done enough with you.
Did you see Hunter Yurichek's response to that whole thing where he's like, feels like a good time to post this?
Yeah.
And it was a picture of Pittman, Musselman, and DVH all hugging.
Well, look at what they do.
A game.
We saw Pittman at the women's softball regionals, right down behind home plate. He's a big fan.
Yeah. Muss was there too.
And we saw Dave Van Horn at the Kentucky basketball game when Cal got thrown out.
That's a great moment.
He was waving bye to him. So, yeah, these coaches on this campus support each other, and they should. That's the way it should work.
Yeah, I think so, too. I don't know why they're not doing it at Kentucky, but that's Kentucky, and we're Arkansas, so that's quite different. Big Hoggard says, I remember the SWC kind of hindered us in our recruiting footprint, and when we entered the SEC, we began doing it much better. If the SEC does go to the pod system and the Razorbacks do end up in a pod with Oklahoma, Texas, and A&M, do you think that could hinder us in recruiting once again?
First of all, I don't think Arkansas is going to, whether they have a pod system or this permanent opponent system or whatever they do, I don't think that Texas and A&M are going to be Arkansas's permanent opponent. I still think it's going to be Oklahoma, Missouri, and probably Ole Miss for geography reasons. But here's the thing. I will acknowledge that when Arkansas went out of the Southwest Conference and into the SEC, they had problems recruiting in the SEC areas because they hadn't had to do that before. And it hurt them in Texas. You're suddenly not there anymore. You're not going to get as many players out of Texas. So it caused a problem for a few years. But if you look at where Arkansas's program is right now, first of all, recruiting in Texas is important to this school, and they've done it well, but they've also recruited other areas. Now, if you're suddenly having these guys as opponents, does this mean you don't play Alabama and Florida and Georgia and those teams, therefore you won't be able to recruit in those areas? No. Whatever system they go to, they're going to be 5 rotating games, probably 3 permanent opponents and 5 rotators. So you're going to rotate enough that you're going to play these teams like Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. you're going to play those teams every 2 years or maybe 3 years at the most. So it's not like you're just going to become invisible to the fans in that area and to the athletes growing up as high school players in those areas. So the long answer to that question is no. I think it will actually help Arkansas's recruiting, and I don't think they're going to end up with Texas and Texas A&M as permanent opponents.
I think so too. Anne Marie says, I love your thoughts on Twitter. Some clueless SEC internet guy ranked the 14 SEC football coaches and how they would do in a fight. I love that. He had Leach and Saban last, and you posted that both of them could lick Drinkwitz. Or what did you actually put? Dinkwitz. That's right, Dinkwitz. I agree. Old guys can be tricky.
Well, first of all, it's a silly thing that somebody does because they got to come up with clicks that day. Probably had a boss on him. Hey, you got to write something to get some clicks. So he dreams up this thing about if they all fight, because they're not going to fight.
No.
We know that. But it is one of those things where when you come up with the list, then all these guys go to work and they're around the, we used to say water cooler, now it's probably just around the coffee machine, and they're talking. Well, who do you think would win? And here's what I'm saying. I agree with Anne Marie.
Okay.
Here's what I say about old guys. First of all, Saban, he may be the oldest one. He may be right at age 70. But he's in good shape.
I wouldn't pick a fight with Saban.
He looks mean to me.
No.
You telling me he can't whip Drinkwitz? Dinkwitz?
Yeah,
Come on, give me that.
Yeah.
And now, Mike Leach, here's the thing I would say about him. Mike Leach is always coming up with stuff you never knew about him. Little weird off-the-wall things.
Yeah.
And it would not surprise me if you picked a fight with Mike Leach, you might find out he's been secretly taking Taekwondo for the last 6 years.
I believe it.
And he might just take you apart. And you wouldn't even know it. He'd come out of nowhere and he just, I didn't realize he could do that. So, no, I wouldn't put those two guys down at the bottom at all. And I wouldn't assume because they're old that they can't fight.
I think that's ridiculous. I think Saban and Leach would be high up on my list.
He had Pittman
Leach
kind of in the middle.
might be even first for me.
He had Pittman kind of in the middle, and I'm not sure about that. I don't know what Sam would do. Sam's kind of mean looking. Have you ever seen that picture when he was in college? He's a tough looking guy.
No, I haven't. I need to see
he looked
that
like
picture.
a guy that would just beat your eyeballs out. So.
But he's so nice though. He's such a nice person.
I don't know. I've had people tell me when he gets mad, he's mad. You know, so I don't know. He might be pretty scary in a fight.
So for number one for you, who is it?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. Whoever's youngest guy is who this guy picked. Whoever's the youngest coach.
I don't think it just goes on the youngest. I think it's Leach for me. I would not take him in a fight. When he was talking about, what was it, 2 seasons ago or last season, he was talking about ranking the mascots in fights, and he talked about that, and he broke that down. If you haven't watched that, it's hilarious.
He was talking about how somebody could do this in a fight.
I'm going, he knows how to fight.
Yeah, so Leach shouldn't have been at the bottom, but I don't know who I'd put at the top.
All right, well, maybe I'll come back to you with that question. Maybe someone will ask next week and Ask Mike. We'll see you next Monday to answer more of your questions.